Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Les Burgum. I'm Frankfurt City Attorney. With me here this evening are Mayor Judy Sheets. We have several city council, and I think Steve Beardsley is here. Who else do we have? Scott. Oh, Mike Wright's down here. And we have Lauren Boggs from Barnes and Thornburg, Clarence Worthen. Clarence, you're here from the council. Todd Corey is here from the utility department, and Ken Brewer from the utility service board. I see Don Stock back here from City Building Services. Scott Shoemaker from the police department. I thought I saw John Kirby walk in, who's our fire chief in Frankfurt, and Jason Forsyth, who is our street superintendent. Did I miss anyone? I hope not. Well, folks, this is the third of 6 informational and outreach meetings that the city is conducting to provide information to and to answer questions and address concerns that the public may have as a result of the city's proposed annexation of the State Road 28 corridor out to the interchange with I-65. I think most of you would recall that for years now the city and the county have sought to extend water and sewage utilities out to the interchange. That has been viewed as an economic development project in hopes of capturing the business that comes with the traffic along Interstate 65 and improving and increasing the tax base for our Clinton County community and the accompanying services that would go along with development out in that area. The city and the county did enter into an interlocal agreement in an effort to get those utilities out to the interchange with I-65 back in May of 2019. That agreement was entered into by the county, by the city, by the utility service board, and by the building corporation. It was established to finance the construction of the infrastructure for those improvements. That work is in progress now. As can be seen, and as far as I know, it is going along very well. The city has not taken any official action on this proposed annexation. No official action will be taken until these outreach meetings have concluded and a fiscal plan has been submitted for public inspection, that an ordinance for annexation has been introduced, notice has been mailed to all property owners, and public hearing held. So those things are all yet to come. We do have maps of the proposed annexation territory on the wall, and I think there are small versions of it printed out available for you folks. The annexation territory cannot be increased, can be modified to some extent as circumstances arise and needs are addressed. And so that can only be taken into consideration as well. Also with us tonight is Mike here from Beauty Financial, and Mike will answer any questions you folks have as to your specific situations with regard to taxes that might affect your property. And he will also give an overview of the tax impact of any annexation that occurs. So at this time, I think I'll turn the meeting over to Mayor Sheets, and she can make all the comments she would like, and then we'll go with Lauren Box, who will give you an overview of the annexation process and how it may affect you. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening for this meeting. This is something that's been on the city's mind for a few years now, and they feel like this is the time to go ahead and move forward. We hope to have the least amount of impact for the property owners, but also for us to be able to have economic development out to that area. We are going to provide information tonight from a legal side, also financial side, but also we're taking into account any information that you might have for us or any concerns. So I ask you to please reach out to us tonight, or if you see a council member, anyone that you think could help answer your questions, please reach out to them. We're here to gather information as well. As Les said, we have not taken any official action, but that is something that we will probably be doing within a month or so. So next I'm going to have Lauren Box from Barnes and Thornburg give you information from the legal side of the annexation.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Lauren Box. As Les indicated, I'm an attorney from Barnes and Thornburg, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the process, also talk about some recent changes in the annexation statute, and of course, answer any questions you might have along the way. So the first thing I want to point out is that some of the recent changes in the annexation statute were made in about 2015, and one of those changes was for us to hold these outreach program meetings. So as Les indicated, this is the third of 6 meetings, and the purpose of these meetings is for us to really have a dialogue to allow the city to explain what it's proposing to do through the annexation, and then of course to hear any comments or questions you might have so that we can then incorporate that information into whatever annexation ordinance might get introduced. So we really view this as a valuable opportunity for collaboration and certainly to hear any thoughts or comments that you might have. And I know that Les and the mayor have already indicated this, but no final action has been taken. So the city has not yet drafted an annexation ordinance. It hasn't introduced an ordinance. We really plan to use these meetings as an opportunity for us to take those comments and then ultimately to refine both the ordinance and the map as we're moving forward. So why are we even in this position where the city is interested in annexing property? And I think the simple answer to that is that the city wants to take advantage of economic development that is going to occur in the future at the I-65 interchange. So the important thing to know about that is that there is a requirement under Indiana law for contiguity. And what that means is that in order for the city to annex property, its actual physical boundaries have to touch that property. So by annexing the property in this annexation, the city is ultimately setting itself up in the future to take advantage of economic development that may occur. And one thing to know about that is in the past, we would have been able to just do a right-of-way annexation. So we wouldn't have actually had to include any property, but with some of those recent changes, we are now required to include property on at least one side of the public highway. So that's why you'll see, of course, the properties that are included on the north side of the highway. I'll echo what the mayor said. Our goal through this is really to have as minimal of an impact as possible. And through these meetings, we're hearing comments, we're refining the map, we're refining the documents, and we will continue to do that so that we will have a minimal impact. So one thing I did want to point out, it was something that we heard as we were going into this meeting, is that there may be some misunderstanding about how agricultural property is treated. And I want to let you know that if your property is assessed agricultural, it will remain assessed that way. There will be no impact when you try to sell the property, whether someone tries to inherit the property, whether you try to pass it on. Your property will continue to be assessed that way unless you make an explicit decision and consent to it being changed. So I think in your packet, there should be a code site there, and we'll spell this out in the ordinance as well. But I did want to make it clear that your property is not going to change, the zoning itself is not going to change for purposes of this annexation. And I should also note that agricultural property is exempt from the municipal tax rate, so there will not be a tax impact on you. So one more thing before I briefly discuss the process. In order to have as minimal of an impact as possible, the city has determined to do a 3-year delay of the annexation. So what that means is if the annexation ordinance is final in spring of 2021, the annexation itself will not go into effect until spring of 2024. The first property tax assessment will not be made until spring of 2025, and then the first actual tax payment, if you have to make one, will not be until spring of 2026. So briefly about the process, I talked about this outreach program. So once we're done with these 6 meetings and we've heard the comments and incorporated them, the city will ultimately introduce an annexation ordinance, and that ordinance will have the final map that we've ultimately determined through this process. With that annexation ordinance, there will also be a fiscal plan, and what that fiscal plan is it's kind of a document that outlines what services will be extended, how they'll be extended, and the cost of those services. So after that first meeting, there will then be a notice of public hearing that's sent to all landowners in the annexation territory. So that notice will have a lot of information with it, but it will ultimately notify you of a public hearing on the ordinance where you can come, and if you have additional comments, if you would like to testify, you will have the opportunity to do so. Then after that public hearing, within 1 to 2 months after that hearing is held, the council will then vote to adopt that ordinance. I do want to point out that there is then what's called a remonstrance period. So there is an opportunity for landowners to remonstrate in this process. So if 65% of landowners sign the remonstrance petition, then the annexation itself is done. Now, if 51% sign the annexation ordinance, then it ultimately will go to a hearing, and a court of law will ultimately determine the outcome of that annexation. So once that remonstrance period is done, if there is no remonstrance, then the annexation ordinance will ultimately be final. So I think that's all I had, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or certainly can turn it over to Reedy Financial to talk more about the financial aspects of the annexation. Yes, sir.
I have a question. As far as building the property, where I said it well, I gotta be at least 50 feet or further from my septic system. My well is probably inside the 50 feet of where these new water and sewage lines are going right now. Another question I have is, when this annexation happens, am I gonna be able to pull out my driveway and head west?
So I can answer the first question, and then maybe others in the city will have to respond to your second question. This annexation will have no impact on your water or sewer service. You will not be required to connect to municipal utilities, provided you have, it sounds like, a working septic system or some other sewage disposal system that's approved by the Department of Health, and if you have a working well. So if you want to continue to operate with those, you can continue to do so, and this annexation is not going to impact that. And then I don't know who the best person would be to direct the question about the traffic flow.
Right now, I have to go down to Jefferson if I want to head west and do a U-turn. It's a pretty sorry intersection, it can get congested. Then when I'm traveling home, I have to go down to, I believe it's 580 and do a U-turn. I have no accessibility to head west out of my driveway. I know in the future there's a proposed location for a new fire department and police department. They don't have access, but I'm sure when I build something there, they'll have access to that west.
Yeah, and I do not know if all of those determinations have yet been made. And if there's somebody at the city here who knows the answer to that question, if not, if you want to leave your information with us, I don't know that any of that has yet been determined, but if it has, we could certainly follow up with you and give you that information. Yes, sir.
I have a question. When you look at the outreach program that we're all doing right now, there's been a couple of questions about it, and as far as services are concerned, and you guys are failing to propose plans for extension of capital and non-capital services in the annexation territory, including proposed dates of extension. There's no information on that right now. Many questions, I would say half a dozen questions during the first two meetings were involved in services, and there were no proposed dates of extension. It was very unclear what services the people that were getting annexed are getting provided. Can somebody enlighten me to why there's no proposed plan? I know that that's part of the physical plan,
Well, it's
but
part of the.
there's no dates.
It's part of the fiscal plan, and there actually are dates outlined in it, and I don't know if we have a draft of that plan. I mean, that information is available, and we can certainly provide estimated dates. I know that there's a list of all of the services to be provided, and certainly we can provide that information. The fiscal plan is not yet final. That's something that will happen when we introduce the ordinance, but we certainly can at least provide a draft, or, Greedy Financial, I know, can go into depth about the dates for extending those services and what services we contemplate will be extended.
Okay. Thank you.
So maybe, Greedy, if you want to address some of that. Okay.
So this question kind of gets into the legality of it as well, where in Indiana's statute, I believe, you have to provide the service within 1 year of the annexation taking effect. So that is outlined in the fiscal plan. Once the ordinance takes effect, it'll be within 1 year. Those services have to be provided to the annexation area.
Is that, now one question, is that when it becomes effect, so like we're talking 2025, or are we talking as soon as it's passed, they have 1 year to?
I believe it's once after the 3-year delay. I believe it's the 2025, 2026 timeframe.
Okay.
All right, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and get into the tax bill pamphlet that we have given out. My name is Michael Bell with Greedy Financial Group. And if there's any other questions regarding the finances or services provided, I can answer those at the end. So there was a 4-page pamphlet regarding how we calculate tax bills. So in this 4-page overview, it's just basically an easy summary on how tax bills are calculated. So jumping into that, the easy calculation is net assessed value multiplied by the tax rate divided by 100 equals the property tax bill. However, there are certain adjustments along the way that kind of go into that calculation that will affect the outcome of the property tax bill. Some of these adjustments are deductions, exemptions, the circuit breaker credit, and property tax relief credit. So going to page 2 of the pamphlet, getting back to the calculation, you start with your gross assessed value, and in the calculation it says net assessed value. So we need to get down to the net assessed value, and to do that, we include deductions. So some deductions, some examples of deductions are the homestead, mortgage, supplemental, veteran, over 65, and the blind or disabled deduction. So once you factor those in, it gives you your net assessed value. And that's on page 2. So then another way or factor adjustment that gets into the property tax bill is if the property or parcel is owned by a governmental unit or not-for-profit, they'll get a full deduction on their tax bill. So moving on to page 3, we have our circuit breaker credits, which get factored into the tax bill. The circuit breaker credit is a cap on your tax bill, so you won't pay more than a certain percentage of your gross assessed value. You won't pay more than 1% if it's assessed as homestead, so your main residence with 1 acre. If it's any more than 1 acre, it'll be in a different bucket, more than the 1%. 2% properties are your agricultural properties, along with residential if they're rental properties and whatnot. And then your 3% properties are your commercial and industrial properties. Another thing that goes into the credits is a 65 and over credit. So typically if you have a 65 and over deduction, you'll receive a 65 and over credit, which means your tax bill can only increase 2% from 1 year to the next. So then the last page, we give a little example on how a property tax bill is actually calculated. This property is $150,000 gross assessed value. So then we have our deductions to get us to the net assessed value. We have our deductions of $45,000 homestead deduction, $3,000 mortgage deduction, and a $36,750 supplemental deduction, which gives us our net assessed value of $65,250. And then we take that net assessed value multiplied by the tax rate and divide it by 100, and it gets us to our gross tax bill. So then once you get the gross tax bill, you apply the property tax relief credit. So then there's the property tax relief credit is 18.7761% for 1% properties, 1% AB. And this gives us a credit of $449.79. So then that lowers our gross tax bill from $2,395 down to $1,945. And then we look at the circuit breaker, your cap amount, the 1% of $150,000 property is $1,500. So what we do is we take the lesser of the adjusted gross tax bill and the cap amount. So we compare the adjusted tax bill of $1,945 to $1,945. We compare it to the cap of $1,500 and we take the lesser of the amount. And that becomes the tax bill for that property, that 1% property over $150,000 gross AB. So that's just a brief overview of how property taxes are calculated. We've done the analysis on every property that within the annexation area. So if you'd like to know your personal impact, you can come up to Brooke or myself after the meeting and we can go over that with you. And then we're also here to answer any more tax bill questions or financial questions related to the annexation. So is there any questions at the moment? Yes, sir.
I have a question, but it has to do with the process, the right of remonstrance.
Okay.
Which currently includes the vote of 65%. So I don't know if that's a question you can answer.
That might be more a question for Homer.
All right, so the question is got several parts to it. Okay, so number one, my question is, if at the point where there's a right of remonstrance that comes up, as it currently stands, is that 65% of the popular vote of landowners or 65% or owners of 65% of assessed land value? Which
So-
way is it?
So it's a different requirement for the assessed value. And so 65% of actual property owners, so individual owners. And then there's a different requirement for assessed value. I believe it's 75%. I'd have to go back and look in the statute to be certain, but there is a different threshold for assessed value and what you would need to hit in order to overcome that burden.
Okay, so the second part of the question is Jefferson included in that popular vote?
So Jefferson is included in the annexation territory. I do not know, but I believe that most, if not all of those properties are subject to remonstrance waivers, which technically they've ultimately waived their right to remonstrate. So while they would normally be included, they would not be included for purposes of the count if they've signed a valid remonstrance waiver.
Okay, so if it reaches that point, it's now, the right to remonstrance is based on 65% of people outside of Jefferson?
No, it will be the entire annexation territory. There will just be certain property owners that will not be eligible if they've signed a waiver of remonstrance.
Okay, well, the problem with that is that Jefferson swallows up the whole possibility, and there's really no reason for there even to be a right to remonstrance. It technically falls into the category of eminent domain, because if they've already been forced to sign and they count in the total count vote, then the rest of the people outside of Jefferson aren't going to sway this at all.
Well, so eminent domain is a completely separate concept, so I'm going to put this over here.
This is true, but that was brought up in the last meeting, and they said up to this point, it's never been used. But if Jefferson counts in the vote, okay, by total land ownership, if they count in the vote and they can't vote, but they're included in the total, then there's not enough people outside of Jefferson to make up a sufficient number of votes to bring this to a right of remonstrance.
Well, that's very possible. I haven't done the calculation either for
Somebody
the.
needs to, because really, there's no reason to have these meetings if it's already a done deal.
Well, the meetings are important still for people in the annexation territory to understand what the process looks like and also, what services and what the financial impact could be. But the annexation territory is not yet final. So until we know which parcels are explicitly going to be included, it's really impossible to do that calculation. I mean, you can certainly do an estimate of the calculation, but until we have that annexation territory final, you can't do a definitive calculation to show whether or not that would or would not be the case.
What do you mean by until it's final?
So through this process, these are the proposed annexation territory maps, but through this process, we've heard landowners indicate we think we should be carved out, or we would like this, or why are you taking this property and not this property? So we're continuing to refine the territory itself, and we'll continue to do that until the annexation ordinance is actually introduced.
So in turn, you guys can, if you find out that a remonstrance is possible, you just carve out enough of it so that you can make it so it doesn't remonstrate. That's a great deal.
Well, no, that's not how it works actually, because when we introduce the annexation ordinance, the map has to be final at that point. So it cannot change. So at that point, that's when the number of property owners will be determined. And at that point, if a remonstrance is possible, it's possible. We have no opportunity at that point to change the map.
But that's true.
But between
However, Jefferson has already been forced into this agreement. So because Jefferson's part of the boundary line, and they've already signed a waiver, so they can't be part of these meetings, but they count in the total head count. It counts in the total head count, but they can't.
To be clear, they can be part of the meetings. It's just if a property owner in that area has signed a valid remonstrance.
They all did. Everyone did.
And I think Ken Brewer from the city I know is here, and he said he had a lot more information about kind of how that process came about and why those property owners signed those waivers. I was not around at that point, so I mean, I certainly welcome if people have questions to talk to Kent, because I know he has quite a bit of history about how that ultimately came
Well,
about.
I understand. So if you go into a business and there's a complaint, and you don't pop your cork up at the secretary. She has nothing to do with it, okay? I realize this is years in the making, but if that's the case, and it certainly appears to be the case, if it's popular vote and not total land assess the value, and they get counted in that total head count, then it looks like that was by design.
Well,
Okay, and then-
it's under the, so just to make sure that you know this, there is a threshold for assessed value. So if there is one threshold that can be overcome with individual landowners, and then there is a second that can be overcome depending on the percentage of assessed value. So just to make sure you know that. And I mean, the second question, like I said, I do not have ultimately the numbers. I don't believe that calculation. I haven't done that calculation. It is very well possible what you say is accurate, that there is no right to remonstrate because of the number of valid annexation waivers. But until we do ultimately design the final annexation territory, I think it's impossible to say whether or not that AV threshold or that parcel owner threshold could be overcome.
Okay, so my second question, that wasn't complicated enough. The only person that's going to use, the only business that's going to use these facilities, water, sewage, at the present is NHK out at the very end. Okay, they're the only ones going to need it unless somebody wants to tap in. And yet they did not get included in the boundary line, meaning they don't have to help pay for it. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, I guess I don't really know the decision why they were included or not
But they're
included.
the only ones using it. So
Well, there's
we gotta pay for it, but they get to use it. If they
I'm
get
not
some
gonna
deal
comment
that
on
they
that.
for
I
10
mean,
years out there, if they join and they're the ones that need it around the end. So for 10 years, they get carved out and they don't have to pay. That looks dirty. I'm not saying it was, it looks under the table.
well, I can assure you it wasn't that, yes, sir.
There are a question there, the city is not paying for any of the water and sewer, it's the county that's paying for the whole installation and everything on those utilities.
Well, to clarify, the county is paying for the extension of the lines. The
Correct.
city is the one that pays for the source of supply and the treatment. So I would argue that it is a shared cost, but to your point, sir, it is the county that is extending the water infrastructure out to the territory.
Does the county get any of the service income then?
Yes, so the county will get, and I don't really know the breakdown, again, that might be a better question for Reedy, but I don't know if you mean by service, if you mean AV.
The
or-
service charge that the users of the sewer get and the water.
Well, no, that will ultimately be the city. Yes, sir.
So when will you know when this map is going to be finalized, so we know Jefferson is going to be involved?
So Jefferson is going to be in the territory regardless. So we know that they're going to be in it.
So how much is this map going to change over the next 2 or 3 months possibly?
I think it will change very little. I think in the past week, we've maybe discussed certain parcels that ultimately might be removed or ultimately shaving kind of down part of the territory in order to have as minimal impact as possible. But I mean, what you see on these maps, it's going to look substantially the same or similar to what you see there. But like I said, the final map will be introduced along with the annexation ordinance. So there will be at least a 2-month, if not more, period, more than a 2-month period in between when that map is final and when the annexation ordinance is potentially adopted, where you can ultimately see that final map and where we came down on it. But I don't expect it to change much from what you see.
So you mentioned that there have been some discussions of removing some properties or adding some. Do you happen to know what those are at this point?
I do not know which properties specifically, but through this process, we've already heard certain comments from landowners, asking, why was the line drawn in this way? Does it make sense to do it this way? So we're trying to take all of the feedback we hear in these meetings and ultimately, if we can, incorporate it into those final documents. So we've already done that in these first 2 meetings and we'll continue to do so as these progress.
I'm gonna add one thing, they cannot add any parcels, the only thing they can do is take away, so there's nothing that would be added.
Sorry, yes, to be clear, I'm sorry, I should have made that point. We're only talking about reducing the territory, we're not adding to it in any way. So it will never be bigger than what you see on these maps, it could only be smaller. Yes, sir.
I think it's my last question. So my understanding from the last 2 meetings was that if a person chooses to hook in to the water system, the day you do that, you are choosing to be part of the annex. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct. You would have to ultimately file a voluntary petition under section 5.1 and also sign a water or a sewer service agreement. So there would be a process, it would be, expedited compared to what we're going through here. But, if you call the city and say, I want to be included, it's not going to happen day one. There will be a process that will go along with that.
Ken, could I have you explain that? I know you have to leave on the Jefferson situation with how that came in and any knowledge that you might have.
The Jefferson came under Indiana State Department of Health, a major violation of contaminating groundwater of the wells and everything else. And so when they put the county on the
Okay, is this better? Sorry about that. So when
Indiana Department
the
of
health
Health and State
came in
on Jefferson residents,
in the homes there, then there became a meeting and an agreement with the county and the city at that time for the city to do as they're doing in this project here. They're supplying water to Jefferson and they're also
treating the sewage from Jefferson. But in that, the county did a bond, and the county put the water, the sewer lines, and the power was in Jefferson. It's county property right now. Utilities supply water and treats the sewage. Utilities collect the revenue on that. And right now, being outside the city limits, they pay a surcharge of 25%. When they go into the city, their sewage and their water bill in Jefferson will go down that surcharge. It'll go back to what all city residents pay at this time. So the city never come in and really forced them to sign a remonstrance waiver. It was all dictated by the State Department of Health. If you didn't do it,
I believe they was going to,
take part of the problem.
condemn it, would be more word.
And that was my understanding as well, is that if they did not do this, then their property would be condemned. So this was, the county were the ones that were in control of that at the time. And then the Indiana Department of Health came in, also our local Department of Health was involved. Wasn't anything to do with the city, it was not like a planned thing where we're just gonna come in and take over. It was something that was planned out and to keep the properties from being condemned. And while we're talking about that, I think it's a good time just to explain to the people that are gonna be annexed in, you are gonna get services from the city in 2025, which would include trash pickup, recyclables, maintenance of your roads, fire protection, police protection, building inspector services. There's a lot of services that you're gonna get with this annexation. And I don't know that people realize that, but I just wanna make sure that you know these are the type of services that you're gonna receive. I think that Jerry, but I don't know if Mickey has it or not. I think he said it was like around $300 or $400 a year savings between the utilities change and also on the trash pickup, what you have to pay now, an outside service. So the city is gonna provide services that comes in 2025. In 2027, then that's when we become responsible for structures, capital improvements, that type thing. So we actually have 3 years after annexation to do those types of things, but your services will come in 2025.
Question is regarding the city's infrastructure, does it have capacity to take on all this wastewater that everybody's gonna be generating?
Todd Corey is here, who is the superintendent of the utility, and I think he can address that for you, sir.
Yes, right now on sewage, we are in a process. The ground was broke 2 weeks ago to expand our capacity from 4.6 million gallons a day to 9 million. And that'll be online in approximately 2 years. And then we're also going through the process right now of doing a rate study and have plans of 90% completion of expanding our water treatment plant to 9 million gallons a day as well. And that will be done before the wastewater, which should probably be about this time next year.
Sir, I believe you had a question earlier about the access to your property.
Yes.
And if it's along State Road 28 there, that is a limited access highway. So I don't see that access would be changed in any way unless and until NDOT would agree to additional street cuts or curb cuts along that area. Now, there has been discussion in the county ranks about relocating portions of County Road 800 West out there and putting a street light on State Road 28, I think just east of where Good Oil is. So that's something that's being looked at to alleviate traffic congestion as well. As Mayor Sheets indicated, the question about when the services will be provided, it's 1 year from the effective date for non-capital services and 3 years from the effective date for capital services. There's a question about the threshold for the remonstrance based on assessed valuation. I believe that's 80%.
So with that being said, with this new proposed location for the future of the fire department, police department, are they gonna have to go out to the entrance of federal local shipping and receiving and turn around and head west?
There hasn't been any decision made as to where the new police or fire station would be located at this time.
I certainly didn't mean to ever send it.
There are several locations being considered.
Yes, at this time, there's been no decision made on when or where there's gonna be a police department or fire department. Like Les said, we're looking at several locations at this time. There are some possibilities out towards that area, but we're also looking at areas inside Frankfurt for the police department. So we have no idea at this point where we're gonna go with that facility. And that would be one of the things that we knew that we needed to check with was NDOT for that access on the 28th. So that is a concern of ours as well.
Well, we want to thank all of you for coming. If there are no further questions, we can adjourn the meeting. And if you should have questions in the future, please don't hesitate to let anyone with the city administration know. We want to know your concerns and we want to try to address them as best we can. We thank you all for coming this evening and look forward to seeing you.
If anyone has questions for Reedy on your individual tax impact, we'd be happy to talk to you about that or any other questions as far as legal ones here.